Okay, so hey guys and welcome back to another Sport This Week video, and in today's video I'm back and I'm going to be doing tennis, baseball, NFL, football, UFC, boxing, Formula 1, Moto GP, ice hockey and cricket news. If you are new around here though and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like video if you do need like video, and let's get straight into it. So starting off this week, I'm going to start off with the tennis news, where it's the continuation of the US Open. And starting this week, Medvedev lost 3-1 versus Kyrgios. Jabeur won 2-0 versus Kurmatova. Swiatek won 2-1 versus Niemier. Nadal lost 3-1 versus Tiafoe. Alcaraz won 3-2 versus Cilic. Jabeur won 2-0 versus Tomljanovic. Swiatek won 2-0 versus Pegula. Alcaraz won 3-2 versus Sinner. Jabeur won 2-0 versus Garcia. Swiatek won 2-1 versus Sabalenka. Ram and Salisbury won 2-0 versus Kulf and Skupski to win the men's doubles US Open. Alcaraz won 3-2 versus Tiafoe. Swiatek won 2-0 versus Jabeur to win the women's singles US Open. Krejcikova and Siniakova won 2-1 versus Meneli and Townsend to win the women's doubles US Open. And Alcaraz won 3-1 versus Rude to win the men's singles US Open. And yeah, that is all the tennis news. Moving on to the baseball news now. Dodgers won 9-4 versus Padres. Yankees won 5-2 versus Twins. Red Sox lost 4-3 versus Rays. Astros won 1-0 versus Rangers. Giants won 7-4 versus Dodgers. Red Sox lost 8-4 versus Rays. Astros lost 4-3 versus Rangers. Dodgers won 6-3 versus Giants. Yankees won 5-4 versus Twins. Dodgers won 7-3 versus Giants. Red Sox lost 1-0 versus Rays. Yankees won 1-0 versus Twins. Astros won 4-3 versus Rangers. Yankees lost 4-3 versus Twins. Red Sox lost 3-2 versus Orioles. Yankees lost 4-2 versus Rays. Astros won 4-3 versus Angels. Dodgers lost 5-4 versus Padres. Yankees won 10-3 versus Rays. Red Sox won 17-4 versus Orioles. Astros lost 6-1 versus Angels. Dodgers won 8-4 versus Padres. Red Sox won 1-0 versus Orioles. Yankees won 10-4 versus Rays. Astros won 12-4 versus Angels, and Dodgers won 11-2 versus Padres. And yeah, that is all the baseball news. Moving on to the NFL news now, where finally it was the start of the season, and it started off with Rams losing 31-10 versus Bills. Trubisky named Steelers Week 1 starter, and Bills extending Knox. Raiders extending Walker. Flacco to be Jets Week 1 starter. Dolphins won 27-7 versus Patriots. Chiefs won 44-21 versus Cardinals, and Packers lost 23-7 versus Vikings. And yeah, that is all the NFL news. Moving on to the football news now. James has signed a 5-year Chelsea contract. Zagreb won 1-0 versus Chelsea. Dortmund won 3-2 versus Copenhagen. Salzburg drew 1-1 versus Milan. Real Madrid won 3-0 versus Celtic. Shakhtar won 4-1 versus Leipzig. Man City won 4-0 versus Sevilla. PSG won 2-1 versus Juventus. Benfica won 2-0 versus Haifa. Ajax won 4-0 versus Rangers. Sporting won 3-2 versus Frankfurt. Napoli won 4-1 versus Liverpool. Atletico won 2-1 versus Porto. Bruges won 1-0 versus Leverkusen. Barcelona won 5-1 versus Plzen. Bayern won 2-1 versus Inter. Spurs won 2-0 versus Marseille. Lazio won 4-2 versus Feyenoord. Sturm won 1-0 versus Midtjylland. Sociedad won 1-0 versus Manu. Sheriff won 3-0 versus Omonia. Nantes won 2-1 versus Olympiacos. Freiburg won 2-1 versus Qarabag. Monaco won 1-0 versus Crvena Zvezda. Ferencvaros won 3-2 versus Trabzonspor. Arsenal won 2-1 versus Zurich. PSV drew 1-1 versus Bodo Glimt. Rennes won 2-1 versus AEK Larnaca. Fenerbahce won 2-1 versus Kiev. Ludogorets won 2-1 versus Roma. Betis won 2-0 versus HGK. Braga won 2-0 versus Malmo. St. Gilloise won 1-0 versus Union Berlin. West Ham won 3-1 versus FCSB. Sivasspor drew 1-1 versus Slavia Prague. Molde drew 0-0 versus Ghent. Shamrock Rovers drew 0-0 versus the Djurgården. Basel won 3-1 versus Pojanic. Slovan Bratislava drew 0-0 versus Zalgiris or Giris. AZ won 1-0 versus Dnipro. Vaduz drew 0-0 versus Apollon. Fiorentina drew 1-1 versus RFS. Istanbul Basaksehir won 4-0 versus Hearts. Anderlecht won 1-0 versus Silkeborg. Villarreal won 4-3 versus Lech. Austria Vienna drew 0-0 versus Beersheva. Slovakia drew 3-3 versus Partizan. Balkany drew 1-1 versus CFR Cluj. English football was postponed for the weekend. Big apologies for all my pronunciation there. I know a lot of it was bad. Leipzig won 3-0 versus Dortmund. Marseille won 2-1 versus Lille. Walsh has joined Barcelona. Tuchel has been sacked by Chelsea. Aurier has joined Forest. Potter has joined Chelsea. Lazio won 2-0 versus Verona. Monaco won 2-1 versus Lyon, and Betis won 1-0 versus Villarreal. And yeah, that is all the football news. Moving on to the cricket news now. Australia won by 2 wickets versus New Zealand. Sri Lanka won by 6 wickets versus India. Pakistan won by 1 wicket versus Afghanistan. Australia won by 113 runs versus New Zealand. India won by 101 runs versus Afghanistan. Sri Lanka won by 5 wickets versus Pakistan. Australia won by 25 runs versus New Zealand. And Sri Lanka won by 23 runs versus Pakistan. And yeah, that is all the cricket news. Moving on to the ice hockey news now. Dutch has signed a 4-year deal with Montreal. Stutzel has signed an 8-year deal with Senators. And Perrault has announced his retirement. And yeah, that is all the ice hockey news. Moving on to the Moto GP, where there was no race this week, but one bit of news being Bezzecchi to stay with VR46 racing team for next year. So that is all the Moto GP news. Moving on to the boxing news now. Ruiz won via unanimous decision versus Ortiz. Gwynn has joined Wasserman. Bostan has joined Matchroom. Paul will fight Silva on the 29th of October. Boxing set to be omitted from the 2028 Olympics, which I think is a terrible bit of news for the amateurs that come through if the sport gets taken away from the Olympics, as for a lot of amateurs that is the best place to be and where they want to be, and if that gets omitted, that would be a real shame. Moving on, Walker has joined Wasserman. Nonchinger has joined Matchroom. Diaz will fight Zepeda on the 29th of October. Shields versus Marshall will now fight on the 15th of October. Obviously, if you're English, you know what has happened and why the events have all been cancelled in England this weekend. So yes, my prediction will not be changed and it will be the same just for the 15th of October. Adano won by unanimous decision versus Roldery to become IBF Latino Super Lightweight Champion. Gibb won by KO in round 4 versus McBroom, which I did predict Gibb to win, not by KO in round 4, but fair play to him, a very good performance. Vale won by unanimous decision versus Guyen to become IBF and WBO World Minimum Champion. So congratulations to Vale, I predicted her to win as well. And Villa won via unanimous decision versus Bocachica. And yeah, that is all the boxing news. Moving on to the UFC news now. All my predictions don't really matter. That video I did was a collab, doesn't really matter. I mean, I'd still watch it because you still get good insight. We didn't just talk about the predictions. But yeah, the whole card got changed around after we did the video. It's a shame, but these things happen, I suppose. And we move. So Rodriguez won by unanimous decision versus Jing Liang, which was a robbery apparently. I haven't seen it, but apparently it was a robbery. A lot of people online are not happy about that. Chimaev won by a submission in round 2 versus Holland. Another thing people aren't really too happy about because of what happened with Chimaev missing weight and not really being that bothered. But I mean, he showed his dominance either way, and we're just going to have to hope that he starts making weight more and doesn't miss it by that big of a margin ever again. And so the main event was Diaz winning via submission in round 4 versus Ferguson, which, even though it wasn't the fight we were expecting, it was a much better fight for Diaz to take as his possible final UFC fight, and Ferguson's possible final UFC fight, you never know. And a great performance, and two legends having a scrap, which you always love to see. And talking about two legends having a scrap, Poirier will fight Chandler on the 12th of November. And yeah, that is all the UFC news. Moving on to the final sport now, which is the F1 news. De Vries to replace Albon for this Grand Prix. This Grand Prix being the Italy Grand Prix, where Leclerc was on pole, Russell started second, and Norris started third. And in the end, Verstappen won. Leclerc came second, and Russell came third. At the moment, Verstappen is turning into a Hamilton back in the couple seasons ago and just can't be beat. So fair play to him. And in the end, Ricciardo, Stroll, Alonso and Vettel did not finish. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you didn't, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.